DOJ for their grant for National Crimes Victims Week. We would like to recognize the Chief Equity Officer for the City of Baltimore and the Director for the Office of Equity and Civil Rights, Dana P. Moore. We would also like to recognize OECR's Deputy Director, Cedric McCray, and the staff of the Civilian Review Board, CRB Supervisor, Emangela Brown, CRB Investigator, Jill Muth, CRB Intern, Kiara Wells, and a big thank you to Saruthi Sarandon, AmeriCorps Vista, for all her work on this grant. For today, the panel includes Captain Orlando Lilly of the Baltimore Police Department, Charles Phillips from Community Relations Service at the Department of Justice, and Mr. Juan Carter, a resident of Baltimore City. Our moderator is Dr. Renita Seabrook. Dr. Seabrook is an associate professor in the School of Criminal Justice, College of Public Affairs at the University of Baltimore. Her research interests include offender rehabilitation program development and evaluation. Dr. Seabrook is the founder of Helping Others to Win, LLC. Helping Others to Win is a comprehensive reentry program that gives women in transition from prison the tools to succeed. Her recent scholarship has appeared in the Journal of Public Management and Social Policy. Dr. Seabrook's op-ed, Let's Get Our Citizenship Back, was also featured in the Daily Record. I will now turn the program over to Dr. Seabrook.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jones. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to be here for our webinar today, especially befitting because this is National Crimes Victims Rights Week in Baltimore. We have witnessed a profound moment in our history, a profound moment of I feel like justice has been served in beginning the healing process, if you will, for African Americans, the whole Black Lives Matter movement. And with the verdict, I think really begins the conversation now of healing. So with that being said, we are amongst a great panel here of professionals and community members who really want to see Baltimore in a new light, Baltimore in a place of healing, in a place of strength. And so I want to welcome our three panelists for today. We have Mr. Carter, who is a lifelong Baltimorean, okay? We have Charles Phillips. He is a conciliation specialist for the Communications Relations Service of the United States Department of Justice. He began his career with Department of Justice, DOJ, 16 years ago in Atlanta, Georgia. And I have to say, I'm from Georgia, okay? Born in Augusta, raised in Atlanta. Since then, he relocated to Philadelphia, where he is currently the only conciliation specialist in the Mid-Atlantic region, handling 5 states and the district. He holds a master's degree in conflict resolution from the University of Bradford in the United Kingdom. Before joining the CRS, he worked for several years in victim services, both with the Travis County District Attorney's Office and the Austin Police Department in his hometown of Austin, Texas. And I also want to bring the bio of Captain Orlando D. Lilly. Captain Lilly is, Orlando D. Lilly is a captain in the Baltimore County Police Department and currently assigned to the 2nd Precinct in Woodlawn. He has been a member for the agency for 27 years. He was previously assigned as the precinct commander of the Youth Community Service Section Recruitment Unit and the precinct commander of the 12th District in Dundalk for 3 years. He is also an adjunct professor at the University of Baltimore in the Forensic Science Department and previously at Baltimore County Community College, where he taught ethics and diversity in the Criminal Justice Department. He received his Master's of Science in Management from the Johns Hopkins University. In addition, Captain Lilly is an associate minister at New Psalmist Baptist Church. A Master Mason, Andre J. Evans, Masonic Lodge, number 102. The Sergeant of Arms for Maryland National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, or Noble Chapter. Director of Mentoring and Retention for the Collective Agreement of Black Law Enforcement. A graduate of the FBI National Academy number 268, and a member of Phi Beta Sigma Incorporated. He is also a United States Navy veteran. Please welcome our panel for our today's discussion. So I want to open it up, and I want to start off with Mr. Carter. So Mr. Carter, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
How y'all doing?
Hello, hello. So I really want to start off with you because you are our lifelong Baltimorean, okay? I want to ask you a couple of questions, and then I'm going to segue it to Mr. Phillips and Captain Lilly. What do you think about when you hear National Crimes Victims Week? What comes to mind?
What comes to mind is what comes to mind is basically victims of a crime.
Mm-hmm. So when you say can you elaborate a little bit on that? Just if you can share any stories or any experiences or lived experiences.
Yeah, from my experiences, I mean, you can look at it to where as though it's a victim of crime with the public or a crime with anybody, like with an officer, anything. So if you've been violated or your rights have been like violated, then you're a victim of a crime.
Okay, so let's kind of get to the heart of everything. We've seen a lot of stories, countless stories of police relations with the community, particularly with the Black community. What are some of the changes you would like to see happen between the police and your community?
Some of the changes I would like to see happen is basically police get held accountable for their actions. And I would say that because, prime example, with the George Floyd and Derek Carvin case, if he would have got held accountable, I think he had like 19 something complaints. If he would have got held accountable from like the start of his behavior that he was showing, that it wouldn't even have gotten this far.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you thinking had they like started from number one or situation number two, we wouldn't have gotten to the George Floyd.
Right. If it was a type of system to where as though you have a certain amount of certain amount of complaints, then you get this consequence and build up his resume. So any court hearing against him, it wouldn't be in his favor anyway because of his behavior.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let me ask you this. What do you think can be done now to strengthen the Black community in Baltimore?
Before we go into that question, I still have some more things that can be done,
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so they also, if police would stop harassing, provoking, and had less egos, it will also be a big change in the community.
Okay.
And if they was put in the right place. But I would say stop harassing and provoking. From my experiences, I've been harassed and provoked by the police, and they could have, like, any one of us could have been like a major case like the George Floyd. Like, I didn't witness things that just never made the media. 1 second. I don't know. Yeah, so I've been in witness situations to where as though it could have been a major deal, but it just didn't make the internet. So so they'd be harassing people if they would stop doing that, and if they were put in the right place, because you can't expect somebody who like not from that like area to know how to deal with that type of people. So you can't put like the most racist person from, like, you can't put a person from the most racist part of Texas in a predominantly Black city. Like, that don't even match up. You asking for trouble. because you know how he was raised. He from that type of environment, so that's giving you a heads up already what that type of person will be like. So if we go deep into picking the right people to serve in these predominantly Black neighborhoods who have some experiences, then maybe the outcomes will be different because they will be more understanding.
So you're talking about more of qualifications of officers themselves and doing more interviewing techniques, or?
And the more, it need to be a real in-depth interview. Like, it can't be like no other interview. It has to be a real, this is serious. People are emotional behind a trigger of taking a life that quick. So it needs to be just like how they take you through all the trouble of being working for the federal government. They need to take you through that hassle by being a police officer, because it's actually a big deal. So
Okay.
they need to have a diligent interview with them. Like, you need to go deep to that history, that pattern of behavior, and you need to put all this on that file.
Wow, okay. I want to pull in Captain Lilly on this. You know, Mr. Carter's bringing up some good points in terms of changes. And as we're going through this, I kind of want to put a disclaimer. This is going to be very organic, okay? We're just kind of gonna go with this. So Mr. Carter has outlined now some of the things that he would like to see in interviewing, and really, I like that word, matching, as he said. Captain Lilly, can you kind of speak on that as an officer of so many years in Baltimore? How you feel about what Mr. Carter is outlining that he sees are some of the changes?
Okay, so I agree with some of the things that he said as it relates to being able to match people with the profession of the work, right? I'm originally from North Carolina, born and raised, so I'm a Southern boy. So I also have to remind myself to be very careful not to stigmatize people from where they come from and then designate as their inability or their ability to be able to work in a certain place. And I tell you that out of because I also was a kid that was born and raised in North Carolina, but moved to Jersey City when my parents divorced. And I lived in a community that was predominantly African American and Puerto Rican, and we did not have a great relationship with the police department. But some of that was starting to be conditioned to not trust them, and some of it was valid. Even from my own personal experience, some of it was valid. And so I do agree that there has to be something that brings in probably even and what he said was he instantly triggered the thought that maybe we do need to start looking at adding to the interview phase a community component, having some community members come and when they're applicants and putting certain questions in place in front of the applicants and using that as a litmus to be able to measure that. Because what we have to understand that culture is adaptive, right? It's so important for us to understand that. I don't care if it's a team, family, organization, professions, all have a culture. And when we say that about it being adaptive, what we mean is human beings will always adapt to our environment because it ensures survival. There were some things that I did when I lived in Jersey City in the inner city that I didn't do when I was in North Carolina because it was required of me. And one of those things, we all used to carry box cutters to school. That was our culture. It wasn't unfamiliar to do it. And unfortunately for me, it ended up in a situation where I ended up getting cut by a box cutter and almost lost my life. But I was never mad at anybody because I put myself in that situation. And that police officer that didn't look like me, from a profession that I was kind of starting being conditioned to not trust, was the guy that was ultimately shed tears because he couldn't understand what in the world was going on that a 10-year-old boy would put himself in a situation where he would almost lose his life. And I did say at that time that if I lived, I would do what he did, because I also understood that if you don't have some of us in here, which also speaks to some of the points he made, then we don't have people at the table to be able to convey the cultural differences. These are things that I still have to share with my colleagues about on a regular basis, is that, yeah, I wear a badge and I have a uniform, but that doesn't mean that I suppress my identity as an African American male to the profession. What it means is that I have something to offer you, and we're not a monolithic group of people, right? Which, you know, we're not all the same. I said, but for the most part, you know, if you take the opportunity to listen to us, then we can make some things structurally sound. And I'll end it by saying this, and then, you know, you can ask what else you want to ask after that. At the end of the day, what we're talking about is trust. A chair cannot structurally stand without the bars that stabilize the legs. You'll never be able to sit in it. And so leadership requires bars and connections that can create an enduring in relationship. And this is what this is about. I used to be in charge of employment, and we would always ask people this first question, and all of you can answer this. We would ask people, why did you want to be a police? The number one response was that they say they want to help people, until you got to help people. Because help may look different to you than what it does to me. What I do know is at that time, if somebody would have said to me, because I was a sergeant then, hey, well, I just want to lock everybody up, we wouldn't have never hired that person. So the process in itself would not always weed those people out, because I was in the military. So I went through a federal government background investigation, and I went through a police investigation. There are things that the background itself doesn't always catch. But I do believe that that is a great idea that Mr. Carter brought up about the interview piece. I believe that would be something that would be great to see, that during that process that they bring in people from the community who would have an opportunity, and that let it be structured so it's fair, so everybody gets asked the same question, right? But I also believe it would give people an opportunity to kind of see how would these people conduct themselves in front of the people that they have to serve, as opposed to trying to fix what you need to say because someone's in the process of law enforcement trying to interview you.
Thank you so much, Captain Lilly. You said a one word that is sticking out to me, and I want to toss it back to Mr. Carter. Then I want to bring in Mr. Phillips. So Captain Lilly said trust, and we're also talking about strengthening the Black community in Baltimore as it relates to police. What do you feel, and this is just an additional question, but what do you feel is the lack of trust, if that's to be said, in your opinion? And then how can we strengthen that the two can merge and really kind of form some kind of relationship, a healthy one, if you will?
I really, as far as I can think, is like when you look at old school pictures, it seemed like the police was more interacting with the public, like they'd play catch with the kids and stuff. So I say, like, and then I just want to bounce back to what he was saying about the interview and they don't catch everything. Is a person ain't gonna really tell you what they gonna do. They gonna tell you what they want you to hear. So that's how they get through the cracks. But when we look at their past behavior, we're not discriminating. You just using that as to build that resume. So if this person is known for this and then the big thing happened, he was known for this. So, I mean, it's just a better point of picking. It's just a better, way to go about it. And like, yeah.
Okay. And I want to bring in Mr. Phillips in this conversation. I know you have video and some things you want to share with us as we continue to talk about the question of strengthening both entities, the Black community and Baltimore, and strengthening them in Baltimore with policing. So do you want to go ahead and share what you want to present to us, and then we'll get into some questions for you?
And thank you, Dr. Seabrook. Yeah, and with respect to you being talking about being organic about this, just the conversation that was had between Mr. Carter and Captain Lilly just now is kind of what we try to have happen, on a much larger scale, as big as possible, while keeping it relatively intimate. In the program that that I wanted to share with you all today, and regarding the video, but this program brings in folks from different affiliations and has them sort of broken out by different affiliations in the morning session, where they're talking about problems. And so if Mr. Carter's in a group, he's talking about the fact that police are not from that area, that police need to stop harassing folks, that they need to be held accountable, like you said about Derek Chauvin. Those come out as problems that during this morning session, where folks are talking about strengthening police and community relationships. And then in the afternoon, folks get together in separate groups, and they start talking about, and there are law enforcement in those groups, as well as people from all different affiliations from a community, that are talking about how to fix those things, or how to address those big priorities. And so some of the things that came up was, a better hiring practice, and figuring out practical ways in which there can be officers held accountable, so that you don't have an officer with 19 complaints against them continuing to be on the streets. So with that, that's what a lot of this video is going to be talking about, the program that I wanted to share. And so I'll get into that, but just a little bit of background for this. This is a program that we started, that sort of has roots that goes back decades, but the actual program that it's about sort of strengthening police and community partnerships, and it's actually discussions that are taking place between different segments of the community and law enforcement, is only a program that's about 4 years old, and it was piloted in around the same time in Erie, Pennsylvania, as well as Topeka, Kansas. At that time, the whole city was done, but in a more major metropolitan area, that would have to be broken down into more geographic areas that could be sort of handled more appropriately. So just keep that in mind if you're thinking about this in the context of Baltimore. But this is a program that was done in both of those places at around the same time, and what came from it was a council that is still meeting over Zoom to this day, where it's members of the community that are meeting with top officials, with law enforcement and the city, to sort of have the exact same conversations that Mr. Carter and Captain Lilly just had. So with that, I will go ahead and share my screen and show that video, and we'll go from there. Can folks see that?
No, not yet.
Hey, Dr. Seabrook, you gotta make sure that he's a host or co-host if he's going to share something.
I don't have control. I do not have control.
Somebody just made him a host, so he should be able to.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Thank
Let me
you.
go ahead and. Is that just starting for you now?
No, not yet.
Okay, I'm still not sharing then.
Yeah, so you still might have to come back out of it and do it now that you're the host.
Okay. How's that?
Okay, yeah, we
There
can,
you
it's
go.
starting to come up. Yes.
Thank
And
you.
I'm gonna charge you guys for my technical skills.
Thank you, Captain Lilly.
Federal government.
Now, is this supposed to have sound?
Yeah, are you not hearing it?
And yeah,
No,
you
I
also
think you
have
have
to,
to share the sound.
yes, you have to share sound also.
Yeah.
So you should have a thing right, whatever the next to was share was, the next to share sound too.
Yeah, so if you, I think
I
you would need to
see.
go back out of it,
Okay.
stop sharing the screen, and then share it again and hit share sound and then optimize the visual. There are two boxes. But I think you have to do it by getting out of the share mode and then get back in it.
It gave me the opportunity to share sound with that one. Is that, can you hear it now?
Oh, we hear it now.
Okay, good, great.
We've had a lot of racial tension over the last few decades. I've been on for 26 years, and it's kind of been consistent.
The issue that led to the SPCP program here in Erie was a violent encounter with the Erie Police Department.
What led to this SPCP program was the death of Dominique White back on September 28th, 2017.
A man had been shot and killed by police officers. Immediately, nobody knew the whole story, and so the narrative kind of spiraled out of control from there.
Every time we'd have a major incident, it seemed like we were talking from one end, the citizens were talking from another.
We were coming to a point where we really believed that we had to try something different, try a different approach.
In any and everything, communication is key. Where there's no communication, stereotypes run rampant, assumptions run rampant.
The SPCP program was brought to us and suggested to us by the Department of Justice. I'll admit, when it was first presented, I was very skeptical of it. But I also knew, on the other hand, that we had some work to do to build the relationship back up with the community.
The SPCP program is a program that brings together law enforcement and the community to work on police-community relations.
It's an opportunity for everyone involved to come to the table on equal footing and to have their voices and their perspectives heard.
Certainly, if you bring a monolithic group to the table, you don't get change. This council comes from so many different backgrounds. You have clergy represented, social services represented, youth represented, neighborhood organizations represented.
The SPCP program coming here to Topeka is a good environment to have our people get their voices heard.
I'm a youth here. I felt like no one was going to actually pay attention, but they were actually doing a good job getting everyone involved and just listening to our opinions.
You don't have to shy away from your convictions, and you don't have to soften your viewpoint. This is an opportunity to have that open dialogue if you desire it.
You have people that just feel disconnected and they want to have a voice. And so what this allowed them to do is face-to-face conversation with a police officer in a setting that they never, ever would have had.
The SPCP program is so important in just getting people together and getting people to realize, hey, the policemen are human beings too. They're here not just to arrest people, they're here to make the community better.
When you turn on the news and when you see Black individuals on TV, it's always in the negative. And for me, it's important to open their eyes up to that. And my eyes were open up to their concerns and what they're going through as well.
We're not here to point fingers. We're not here to say they're wrong, you're wrong. We're here to say, okay, how do we move from point A to point B?
There's been a lot of healthy pushback in these conversations, and having this group of varied voices has lent to the authenticity of the debate. I'm encouraged by the fact that there isn't always a neat and tidy answer at the end of every meeting. That makes me know that what's going on in this room is real, and that we aren't just here placating each other for the sake of cameras, reports, and everything else.
Well, there was no hiding from what was discussed and what was identified. There are some things that are easier to work on than others. some we don't agree on, some we have to have more discussion on. But there's enough there that we can work together to come up with solutions to some of these issues.
The SPCP program has made us better by saying we are not afraid to open ourselves up to the outside.
How many other programs are out there where the leadership and plus the police department is wanting to hear from the community what they're doing wrong and what they're doing right? That's accountability, it's transparency, it's also courageous. I believe that this is great and this needs to happen in so many other places. But the leadership and law enforcement, they got to be courageous enough to do it.
Police community relations currently, they're trending upward, but we have a long way to go.
Racism, prejudice exists across the country, but we are a free society, and diversity is our greatest strength. And this is a way to really capitalize on that diversity. It's a major effort on our part. It's the #1 priority of ours, and we continue to work at it.
Here in Erie, Pennsylvania, we've bought into the system of people change, and that's why we're transforming Erie. That's why we're restoring hope to the community of Erie.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you for showing that, Mr. Phillips. So can you kind of continue to talk about this, the video that you just shared?
Sure, and I don't want to. I mean, I obviously have a PowerPoint that sort of explains it a little bit more. Maybe it would be helpful if anybody has any questions, sort of where it is, where it's left there with the video. I'm happy to do that, or I can sort of go into the PowerPoint. Sort of takes it step by step into the mechanics of it, whichever you prefer.
Are there any questions right now, Mr. Carter?
Yeah, I got one suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, like, don't you know how when people say focus on yourself before like you try to worry about everybody else? Like, get you together first, right? Don't you know that saying, right?
Yeah, I know the saying.
Yeah, I'm just basically saying, like, what if like the police just need to focus on their self, get their self together before they try, like, because it seemed like they doing what people do, pointing the finger at everybody else when they are the problem. So maybe they should like hire and refire. Fire and rehire, and just work on their self internally, because they're the problem.
So let me. Can I play a little devil's advocate? I don't know if I'm saying it right, devil's advocate.
Yeah, as associate minister, I don't want you to use that. You can just say, ask a provoking question. Yeah, okay. That's the best way.
But I'm gonna ask it. So I kind of want the three of y'all to take the official. So Mr. Phillips and Captain Lilly, take the official hat off for a moment. You're citizens, and we're talking to Mr. Carter, long life Baltimorean. But Mr. Carter, I need you to put another hat on. I need you to change roles. And you put that hat on. But I want to ask you a specific question though before you put that hat on. What do you think you and your peers, and Mr. Phillips, I'm going to get you back on track with showcasing the PowerPoints and stuff. But we're constantly talking about what we think is police reform, and rightly so. But what do you think you and your peers and your community need to do to help build the trust in the relationship? Because we can't always we always point the fingers at the police, and I get that. But what can you and the community do to help build a healthier relationship?
Like, do the same, basically, like, everybody, we need to focus on this. Gonna go into like the other question. I feel like it's gonna go into the other question. So should I go into it?
Yeah, go ahead.
So basically, just like how the police, hold up. Yeah. Just like I said, the police need to focus on their self and better their self, the community do also. But you know, everybody focus on themselves, the community focus on themselves, and the police focus on themselves, and eventually it's going to be a better relationship. And when I say focus on themselves, I mean like we need to get more educated. We need to, because when you know better, you do better. So that's going to be the good part of our end. And on that end, with the racist police officers and stuff, they need to work on them, and then there's gonna be a better relationship. Because if we working on us, but they still not working on them, then it's still gonna be a clash.
Yeah, because you know, both ends have to take the responsibility, right? You
Yeah,
know, on making the relationships healthy.
right.
And so, yeah.
And not to cut you off, but just like if we do people, like just like if you're a person, if you're in a relationship with a person, y'all can't make each other better. Only that person has to better their self, and then the relationship will be there, because they try and fix each other, but they need to focus on their self before the relationship can even work.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in because I understand what he's saying. I mean, he's basically illustrating the fact that you need to first to accept that you need to be fixed before you can actually engage in anything else with anybody else.
Bingo.
So I know what you're saying, Mr. Carter. And I say that from, and you, Dr. Seabrook, you said you illustrated it well. And I'm going to be who I am as Professor Lilly for 1 second, and throw a term out. And one of those terms, when we talk about these intellectual traits, there's an intellectual trait that we talk about that's called intellectual empathy, which basically is having a level of consciousness of the need to imaginally put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and their experience. And so what I can say to Mr. Carter and Mr. Phillips, Ms. Phillips has been on my Candid Conversations as well. And what I tell people is, when Orlando Lilly is not driving around in that police car, nobody know I'm the police. And I've gotten pulled over by the police. And in many instances, I kind of see how far that conversation is going to go before I make that turn. However, I also understand the fact that if the only time that you come into contact with me is at work, your brain is like a computer. It's going to look for the information that it has access to. And if the only information that you have is about Orlando Lilly is a stereotype, then that's what you're going to kind of acquiesce to. Law enforcement has always, unfortunately, gone through what we call a crisis cycle, all the way back to 1931, Wickersham Commission, and all the way up to today. And what happens is we find ourselves at these very focal, pivotal moments of a George Floyd, and then people have this epiphany that we need to change. We need to change. And in order to grow, you should be in a constant state of examination and looking at yourself. And so it swings from one way to the other. I do agree that Mr. Carter hit on this too, where we are both kind of, one, accepting that we need to change, but I do believe that we can do that together. And I always use those in the analogies of relationships. I've been dating my wife since the 8th grade. We'll be married 31 years this year. And this was a person who came from a 2-family home, who married a kid who wasn't projected to live past 16, based because on my own behavior as a young person. And that watching her changed me. Listening to her changed me. Granted, like I said, I needed to understand that I needed to change, but I did make those changes. And I do believe that we still have to kind of do this in concert together collectively, as opposed to, because what's happening now is we can't afford to wait on law enforcement to totally fix itself without a diagnosis of what needs to be fixed, which means that there has to be a part that the community plays, a role that the community plays, and saying, hey, this is what we want to see. And I tell people, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, so I'll leave it at there, because I don't want to step on some areas where you may be going already.
I'm muted. This is as organic as it's going to be. This is the kind of conversation that we all need to have. And so I want to pull in Mr. Phillips as well, because I want you to shift hats before I give you the floor again to really highlight the program that you just showed us. But it's really looking through the lens of how someone else sees the situation. And so, you know, having Mr. Carter look at the lens of policing, you know, even though he ain't been in those shoes, but he's been around it. And what does that look like for him? But for you and Captain Lilly, what does it look like when you take that professional hat off, that policing hat off? Because a lot of times, this is just me talking. You have a lot of politicians and people who tell what the society need or tell what your community need, but you didn't talk to the people who actually live in the community, what they think they need or what they know they need. And so if we're gonna really just have these fluid conversations to really get at the core of what we see the problem is, then we really gotta focus on the lens of others and where they're coming from. So Mr. Phillips, how do you want to continue to chime into that particular this conversation right here?
Thanks. There's a lot I want to say. First, to Mr. Carter's talking about sort of folks working on their own in their own camps. I don't know really what that would look like. And I'd be sort of curious to hear more about that, because I'm a little concerned that, you know, one of the problems of being where we are is because folks are so much in their own camps, and they don't sort of cross communicate a lot with each other. And to Captain Lilly's point, you know, something that strikes me that I heard a long time ago was, if the only tool in your toolbox is a hammer, then everything begins to look like a nail. And I think that in a lot of ways, both camps are in that place right now, more so than they should be. And the only way that it gets resolved is by sort of sharing each other's perspectives in these non-enforcement kinds of ways. Again, like Captain Lilly talking about, if that's the only contact that you're having with law enforcement is an enforcement contact, then, you know, you're going to be prejudiced against the police. So there's got to be, as you said, Mr. Carter, the old school, you know, interactions between law enforcement and the community that people see as idyllic, that we just don't see enough of these days anymore. And there are reasons for that. A lot of them are probably bad reasons. But until sort of those kinds of things are addressed, you know, and at least shared, those different perspectives shared, and you know, these processes are ones in which not only is the community sort of sharing their perspective, but law enforcement is sharing theirs as well. One of the biggest epiphanies that I had in this job, and I think it's very much a sort of something I would think of as or it would have been a big deal to me if I'd heard it or been exposed to it beyond this job, is the fact that, generally speaking, and I don't want to paint a too broad of a brush, but generally speaking, law enforcement sees every incident that happens where it's an excessive use of force type of complaint or a police shooting or those kinds of things as a singular incident, it has nothing to do with anything else that has happened. So when they see a situation like Officer Chauvin or Derek Chauvin, they see that as a singular incident, irrelevant to any other case that has ever occurred where there's an excessive use of force type of complaint. And so we'll handle this as, that's bad, this is okay, this is all right, you know, but all separately in a vacuum, whereas the community does not see it that way. Most, generally speaking, folks see it as part of a narrative that has gone on for way, 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 way too long. And that is like a language barrier. That's like I'm speaking a language you don't understand, and vice versa. And until you sort of get to why that's your perspective versus why that's my perspective, for example, it's hard to communicate, if that makes sense.
It does. There has to come to a point where candid conversation and honest conversations have to be had. And Mr. Carter said, when you're in a relationship, it's like sometimes the hard talks have to be said to get to the healing. Some words have to be exchanged. You done unmuted yourself, Captain Lily. What you go?
Yeah, well, because I'm gonna go back to where I started with this trust piece, right?
Yes.
And we don't have to reinvent the wheel on every little thing. And when I say that is, there's a book written by Patrick Lencioni called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. He shapes it in the middle of a period with the 5 dysfunctions. And that bottom, the support piece of that is the thing that I said earlier, was trust. And what he says is that team that lacks trust lacks the inability to engage in unfiltered and passionate debate of ideas. And then ultimately what he said those things resort in is veiled discussions and guarded comments, right? That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about trust.
Yeah.
And so I get exactly what Mr. Carter said, because I can identify with those things personally as an African-American male. And I also understand what Mr. Phillips is saying, because I also realize this point of it too. If I went to the doctor, if my daughter was sick or my son was sick, and me or his mother went to the doctor and left them at home, they're not talking to the patient. They're talking to a representative of the patient. And what happens is, what's happening in this season, the community no longer wants you to just talk as a representative. They want you to talk to the patient. And we have to, and if you don't do that, if you don't establish that foundation of trust, look, I'm the biggest fan in the world for programs, right? But I also know this: if I'm not at a place where I don't trust you, I don't trust your program.
Right.
Right. So you could come and say, and what I've learned in the years of doing the work, there's a difference between community-based policing and relational policing. Community-based policing was and it was great concept when we did it, but it was something now that we need to push a little bit further. And that's where the relational base come in. And relational base basically builds on that foundation by having relationships other than partnerships. And you know what that look like? What Mr. Carter said. Sometime when you're in that car, get out that car and you see somebody shooting basketball, just go shoot basketball with them. There's a group of us who pass around those little clips to each other when we see them, and we bust out laughing because we know those people represent us. My voice is one of many voices. There are 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the country, 18,000. And the community, and that badge carries a lot of weight. But with that badge comes enormous responsibility. And so we're asking, in many instances, younger people who already had some socio-eccentric development things happen in their own life or what their exposure to. They use the illustration that Mr. Carter was laying out. If you got people that grew up in a certain area and they weren't exposed to certain things, then that's their environment. And so when you have people like what we're saying now is, I would love to see, and because I'm going to ask this question later anyway, was how many of you've gone to a Citizens Academy? You know, how many have gone through where the police department invites you in and go through the training, and then even put a gun in your hand without, and I'll say video game instead of using our the name that we actually have for it. But we have a game where we send people down to the academy and they shoot, and we send the citizens too. And so when I ran that unit, the 1 year that I did it, 98% of the people, the citizens shot the wrong person. You hear what I said? 98% of the citizens shot the wrong person. And what it did was it made us sit down and then go back and have another conversation. We had a total different conversation. And look, you can't bring somebody back after you take their life. You cannot do it. And what I mean by that is, even when, and this is why I'm careful to use the word that George Floyd got justice. What his family got was a process that for temporarily will help them feel, hey, we was able to get something out of this for him. But guess what they'll never have back? George Floyd. Guess what his daughter will never have? George Floyd. So did he really get justice? Right? And so that's why you are starting to see these conversations change about, should we call it the criminal legal system and not the criminal justice system? And I'm not the one to hang out with words because they're just words, but I understand why the dialogue is in that place. And so basically now we got to work in collaboration with communities and create an atmosphere of trust between the police and the diverse communities that we serve. You guys are going to hear me say that for the rest of the day because I'm intentional about what we got to walk away with. And if you don't get nothing else out of me today, it is that we should understand that it has to be a relationship built on trust. Me putting together a program, you know, this is my second year doing the community candid conversations, and it's getting better every year because I understand every year what we need to do a little bit differently to start building the relationship. And so if I did it like I did last year, I should expect the same results, and I wanted better results. So what I'm saying is we got to constantly keep looking at this and making an analysis and diagnosing it, but letting the community understand that, hey, we're here. We're not just listening to you, but we hear you.
Thank you so much. And I think what you said, Captain Lilly, is a good segue to go back to Mr. Phillips, because we understand what you're saying in terms of the relationship, the trust. So now in factoring in the community-based programs and stuff, Mr. Phillips, can you now show us the PowerPoint slides of the program and kind of walk us through? So I'm just going to throw out 3 questions, and you can kind of explain that as you're talking through the PowerPoint. So one question for you is, looking at the program, how would the strengthening community and police relationships be implemented in Baltimore City? Okay. The next question, what stakeholders are needed to successfully implement and sustain the program? And then the third question, how do you get buy-in from the stakeholders, the police, the community, nation, states at large, if this was to be expanded out, outside of Erie and Baltimore City, and can the Southern region, Captain Lilly said he's a Southern boy. I'm a Southern girl. How could this be adapted down South? Because y'all know what it's like down South. How adaptable, Captain Lilly, don't laugh. How can this be adapted, in different regions? Because different regions, as we know, have their own stuff, own hiccups. So I'm going to throw the mic back to you and kind of massage through those questions as you present the PowerPoint.
Yes, and Dr. Seabrook, I think all of those questions that you asked are going to come up in the course of the presentation. And it's only going to be about like 7-8 minutes, I think.
And then let me ask this. And this is Mr. Carter. Once you're done, Mr. Phillips, I want to ask you, after Mr. Phillips is done, do you think this program should and can be implemented in Baltimore? I want to hear from you as well, what you think about the implementation of the program, okay? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Phillips.
I think Mr. Carter was going to answer.
Oh no, I was just saying okay.
Okay, all right, cool. All right, so I'm going to share screen again. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
And I'll do that as a proper slideshow. And just a quick background on us, because I didn't really speak about that. Our agency was formed as part of the '64 Civil Rights Act to mediate in cases of race, color, national origin was the original language there. We are not investigators. We're not law enforcement. We are mediators working between usually civil rights groups and city government entities like just regular city government, school systems, and individual like high schools and middle schools, and oftentimes law enforcement. And with the advent of the Hate Crimes Prevention Act, which came out in 2009, a lot of additional protected classes came into that as well: gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, disability, in addition to the original language of race, color, national origin. And basically what we do is provide training. We mediate between civil rights groups and usually local government entities, do consultation on how to address issues in the wake of tension related to those protected classes, and facilitation of programs like what I'm going to be talking about. Interestingly enough, in the context of Captain Lilly's last words about building trust, the original program, what we'd come up with the stakeholders that we worked with was police and community trust building, which would have made it PACT, P-A-C-T. The previous administration did not like that language. They wanted it to be police up front a little bit more, and that's how it got to this SPCP language, which is more of a mouthful than it was originally. Just wanted to throw that in there. The idea behind this is to bring community and law enforcement together to have frank discussions on what the issues are within a local department, and then how to solve those issues. So when we do this, it is largely in the wake of a critical incident that has occurred. Often when there's maybe a new administration at the local government level or at the police department level, or just ongoing issues between law enforcement and the community related to our jurisdictional areas, which, to be honest, I don't think there's a law enforcement agency in the country that doesn't have any issues related to race, color, national origin, especially where we are right now. So I think just about anyone would benefit from this. So, and what we want to do is bring folks from like all segments of a community together. And I'll talk a little bit about how we break folks out and whatnot, but these are typically the like groups that we try to invite a good deal of representation from, city and county government. Again, if it's going to be for a city, then it's probably going to be just city government, just like it's going to be just city law enforcement. And then youth, community-based organization, clergy that represents that community where we're doing it as well. So just a quick overview of the actual process, and I'll talk a little bit about this planning group, which would be composed all of local stakeholders, and would consist of usually representatives from, again, clergy, civil rights, ideally youth, but often hard to get youth at the planning group stage of this, but definitely folks that know how to bring youth into the process. And then representatives from law enforcement as well. That planning group meets usually around 4 or 5 times. They are determining all the logistics for a one-day event. And so it's going to be, where it's going to be, when it's going to be, the homogenous groups that need to be invited to it, as in, in addition to in addition to clergy and civil rights and youth, who else do we need to have there? For example, in Erie, there's a very, very significant immigrant population because it's a UN resettlement community. So there was a specific homogenous group for what they refer to as new Americans. And so the planning group determined there should be a new American homogenous group. And so then when we do the actual event, you've got around 60 to 80 representatives in a community. Dr. Seabrook, you asked the question of sort of like how it would work in Baltimore. And like I said a little bit earlier, probably it would be by police precinct or district that it would be done in a place like Baltimore. It's far too big to, Baltimore's far too big to like bring the entire city in to do this at once, unless you maybe did it after you did a substantial number of like police districts where you were trying to bring folks together that were representative from each of the ones that had been done, if that makes any sense. But definitely on a much more local level where people in that, from that area, know each other. A lot of them know each other. A lot of them can sort of relate to the issues of that particular police district or ward or whatnot. So you have 60 to 80 people. They're divided into 5 to 6 groups usually in the morning, where they're looking at what they see are the biggest issues related to police in the community. And one of those breakout groups would be rank and file law enforcement, would be, street officers that are getting the exact same questions as everyone else. Usually it's something along the lines of what are ideal police and community relations and what are the barriers to getting there. And then from that point, they're also represented from each of those groups are sort of chosen amongst the groups to form a council. So representatives from each of these groups are forming a council in that morning part of the session that's going to meet regularly with law enforcement after the event. And then in the afternoon, there is a session where we bring everyone together or bring folks that are represented from each of the homogenous groups together to start problem solving their highest priorities that they identified during the process. And then once that event is over, or once that morning portion and afternoon portion is over, after each, there's a report out to a larger group. And then a council that meets regularly with police administration, again, from that district or that locale. And I was, the previous slide was much more on sort of the overall picture. This is what the actual day, the one-day event looks like. And I was sort of speaking from that point of view. You have an overview of the process in the morning, around, again, 60 to 80 people that are representing that particular area, that are all there in one large room. Then they go into breakout rooms, start looking at what they see are the biggest issues, come back into a large group session, and each of the representatives from each of these groups do report outs. And then there is a voting process where the top 5 to 6 issues are identified based on everyone's vote. And then we break people out into mixed groups where they're solving those issues or start working on solving the top issues that were identified. Once again, there's a report out from each of these groups. And then there's evaluations, closing remarks from the folks that organized it at the local level, and then a debriefing, and then a calendar date is set for the first meeting of the council that's formed from this process. Any questions at this point? Okay. Y'all still able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So this slide is just identifying that these are like-minded groups in this first session in the morning, and in the afternoon it's representatives from each of the groups that are in the mixed group sessions in the afternoon. A report is formed, which is it is vetted by the U.S. Department of Justice. It documents basically everything that was caught on from the individual breakouts. So all the problems that came out, regardless of whether or not they made sort of the top issues, all the problems that were voiced by the community members, and all of the solutions that were identified by the groups afterwards. And that becomes sort of a roadmap for the council to work on. So for example, if one of the top issues was sort of minority recruitment, or if one of the issues were police are not held accountable, those kinds of things sort of become sort of the roadmap of priorities for the council to work on. The council, like I said, would be made up of representatives from each of those groups that the planning group identifies. So, for example, the planning group might be around anywhere from a dozen to 18 folks. Maybe a couple from the civil rights community, some from the clergy, some from youth. Some representatives from law enforcement. It might be representatives from different housing organizations, so on and so forth. And they would meet regularly with command level staff for that particular district, or for a city, for the entire department. That is roughly what the schedule for the day looks like, just so that you have a visual of that, and hopefully that's not too small to see. But again, it's sort of laid out as I said earlier in the slide, but it gives you an overview of what that one day looks like. And then from that, just to sort of show you, this was the group from Erie, Pennsylvania, where they came up with their own vision and mission, representatives from law enforcement and the community that are part of this. And like I said, this group is still going strong. Very coincidentally, the SPCP was held on April 21st of 2018. And I didn't even notice that date until just now. But yeah, 3 years to the day, and they are still, like I said, meeting on a regular basis. So that is it for the.
So if you can, so with your slide 16, it had that word that Captain Lilly keeps sharing, trust. Restoring. Mr. Carter, is this a program that you think could work in Baltimore City?
Yeah.
Do you think it'll work in part or in whole?
Starting off probably in part and then eventually whole.
Captain Lilly, what do you think could be in talking with Mr. Carter and how this particular program, if we were to begin discussions on how we can implement this, if Mr. Carter's saying at the beginning in part, what do you think could be those parts that could start this process in bridging it out?
Part of that has to be having Mr. Carter really kind of partner up with Mr. Phillips in a way that not only that he understands the program, but he can also become an ambassador and advocate in a way and in the language that we would all understand it. I think oftentimes, you know, and I'll use the Police Athletic League for an example. When we had the Police Athletic League, one of the things that I had the opportunity to be in front on was to help kind of get it structured. But what I also said was, we can't keep being in the business of building something for people that we want to participate in and then asking them to come. That's backwards, right? And as smart as all these people are on here and all of us with all these degrees, the beauty of a degree is this, and I didn't talk about this intellectual trait on this particular one, is this whole piece about intellectual humility, having a consciousness about the limitations of your knowledge. My language does not always transfer if I'm talking like Professor Lilly all the time in a language that people don't understand, because that doesn't resonate with them, and so I'll spend so much time trying to understand what you're talking about that I may miss something. So I do believe that, you know, this is a great product. You know, I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh man, that's good. But I also know that, hey, I've been doing this community's work long enough to know too that as we say down south, put it where the goats can get it. And then that way you don't have to spend a whole lot of time trying to explain what you're doing, especially, and remember this, Stephen Covey writes a book called The Speed of Trust. And he talks about it in the context of high trust and low trust. And what he says is that when the trust is low, you can lay everything out on the blueprint as clear as day. People still won't get it because they don't trust you. But if the trust is high, I could say the bare minimum, and because the people understand me, they'll know where I'm going with it, right? And so so like I said, I think it's a really great product, but I also feel like too that with people in certain communities, they have to participate because I think he alluded to this anyway, you have to make sure that that program is suited for that community, that it needs to be able to adapt the needs of that community, or we risk saying that, oh, I can take this and just drop it and do the same thing here, and that's not true. Right. And I say this because these are some of the same things that I've had to say to people when I made that transition from North Carolina to Jersey City. And the part that I left out on here was I grew up on a farm. So picture a boy who grew up on a farm going straight to the inner city of Jersey City. That was culture shock for me. They looked like me, but we didn't have the same culture. And so we have to learn how to integrate these things that we want to do. Once again, with this diagnosis, right, going to the patients and saying, hey, this is what we have as an outline of a program to do. But then what you've heard me say, how do I make this fit into the needs and concerns of your community? Because the part that we're at right now is that everybody knows that we're in a place where the profession itself doesn't have the trust. We know that piece, but that trust can manifest in different ways in different places. And so whereas there's places, even with myself, there's places where I can go in because people know me. But as Captain Lilly, my peers and can't come. And if they're with me, people will be more quick to trust them too, because they're like, oh, well, Lilly not going to be around somebody that he doesn't trust. So you have to really make sure that a lot of people are the right people are at the table. And then, like I said, people have to be in on the front end of helping shape that thing to be the way it needs to be for their community so they can be ambassadors and advocates of it.
And if I can jump in really quick, because
yes.
There's one question that I didn't answer adequately, and I think both Captain Lilly and Mr. Carter sort of spoke to it, and that is, again, this planning group has to be credible with the community. You've got to have folks that don't like the police. You got to have folks that are activists within the community that have credibility on the streets, that are making decisions about this process, and you need to invite them to both the planning group and through the actual event itself. Because if you've just got a bunch of folks that are, you know, that come to police meetings that are always the same folks that love the police, then that's not going to have any credibility within that community. and folks are just gonna just disavow it, immediately. So it has to be credible. It has to be seen from all angles as being credible and not just ticking off a box. And I think that speaks very much to sort of the hesitation that I heard from Mr. Carter, as well as from Captain Lilly. So I just wanted to put that out there. That's very much built into the process, and yeah, we get that.
Wonderful. So what I want to do, as we're starting to wrap up, I just want to open the floor to Captain Lilly, Mr. Phillips, and Mr. Carter, just to say,
Yeah, my computer just, did it go out on y'all or?
yes, it did, but you back. Yeah,
it just
you're
went out
back.
by itself.
Yes, I want to mention again that this webinar is being sponsored by the Office of Equity and Civil Rights Civilian Review Board. Okay, so I want to ask our panelists to just give us some final thoughts as we come to a close with our webinar, and then I want to open up for any questions that our guests have. And then I'm going to give it to Miss Evangela Brown. So, Mr. Carter, I want to start with you. Do you have any final thoughts or just words you want to say as we come to a close?
Yeah, a couple actually. I want to go back to the question that say, what do I think that can be done to strengthen the Black community in Baltimore? So I would basically say that the children need to start with the children, like start from where it starts, from where everything starts, which is with the children. Because like Whitney Houston said, the children are the future. They really are. So children, the youth need more opportunities to learn and grow and have fun. Because when you're having fun, you're not worrying about getting in trouble. You're just having fun. And when you don't have nothing to do, from experiences, from growing up here, from speaking on what I know, when there's nothing to do, you find stuff to do, whether it's good or bad. You find stuff to do because you a kid. What else? You don't got no job. You out for the summer, so it's really free time to run rampant. So children, and then they need more escapes because like what the difference between an adult and a child is a child has to deal with the toxic people in their environment and in their household. They can't just leave whenever they want. They're stuck dealing with that until they're 18. So whether the behaviors that they learn is good or bad in their eyes, because when we go back to trust, when you learn it from a trusted source, you tend to be that way, whether you know it's good or right. So the blind is literally leading the blind. So where we can step into play is like add more escapes for children. So open up the Rex, open up the Rex because they really have like meaning and purpose. Open up the Rex, open up more trade schools. Because me speaking from experiences where I went to a trade school, everybody in the city wanted to go to my school. And when you ask people in my school, their favorite class was trade. And you want to know why? Because you get to tap into your God-given gifts that you was given to. So you get to find what you do and don't like doing crafty wise. And like they give you an opportunity to really be hands-on. And we as kids and people period, they like hands-on stuff. So college not for everybody. So they push that Poly and City is the best college high schools to go to, but in reality it's not. Merville is the best one. And that's not even just to boost up my own like experience, because I actually have experience with going to other high schools too. I went to Dunbar as well, and I went to a college preparatory school and I went to a trade school, so I have a perspective of both. And with the college preparatory, I went there knowing like I wanted to be a doctor for real, but then I found like I don't want to do that like for the rest of my life. So when you want to be more in tune with yourself, you tend to go towards like your natural gifts, like I was saying. So like, yeah, so the trade schools will actually really serve a big difference on our part of the relationship, like going back to relationship. That will also help build our end of the relationship. We gotta you know, learn more so we can know more and know how to, because people doing the best they can with the set of tools that they have, and they don't have a lot of tools, then they working with a hammer, like Mr. Phillips said, right? Am I right? So yeah, and we need extra like school activities so that they can give the children escapes, so they don't gotta go home directly after school and got drag their feet to get back in school. From my experiences, like the after school programs really make a big difference because you push to go to school more, and you push to do better in school. Like you subconsciously like forced to do better in school because you getting a better outcome. Like you putting the control back in the kids' hands. So with the after school program, to give them, like the one I had, it was called Acts for Youth. It actually was a mentoring program that mentor like young men things that they didn't learn in the household growing up without a father, like I did. That actually helped because we was taught things that we didn't was taught within the house with a single mother. So we was taught things that we didn't learn. So we had like a advantage than the other people who wasn't in that program, who also didn't have a father figure. So those programs really do serve a purpose. So we need more of them mentoring programs to really dive deep into understanding the kids more and to really help them be better, because they don't have that opportunity, because they, like I said, they living in a toxic household. So they push to be toxic unless they got a strong mind to know what's right or wrong. But 9 times out of 10, they learning from a trusted source, so they gonna do what everybody else doing. But
so basically, you're saying, just having more programs for youths, just having outlets. So that's kind of like your main thing in terms of the strengthening of the community. One of so many.
Yeah, one of many.
Yeah.
That would really help, and that I know, that I really know from my experiences and others around me, that will really make a difference, and that really have made a difference, that I can really say that it has.
Okay. Well, let me also give Mr. Phillips a minute or two just to kind of his closing thoughts on today's session.
Thank you. I don't have a whole lot more to say that I haven't already said. One thing that is always a part of this process is, again, a group that just sort of represents youth of that area, and invariably that's going to be the most sort of compelling presentation of anybody's in terms of improving or what the problems are with police and community relations, and sort of what the solutions are. People are going to listen to that perspective closer than they're going to hear anybody else, just because of where they're sitting. So that's the only thing that I would add to what I've already said, because it speaks so much to what Mr. Carter just shared. Again, very poignant discussion.
Wonderful. And Captain Lilly, any final words?
So first, I want to just really praise the young prince, Mr. Carter. He is really at the precipice of his own self-efficacy. I could see that in him, that his belief in his own capabilities and what he brings to the table. It makes my heart glad. And pretty much when he talked about this piece about the toxic environment, that was a powerful piece coming from a young man. And so what I realize is that when we get to this place of that self-efficacy and understanding, or the lack of a sense of supremacy over followers, and we equip leaders with the capacity to lead properly and serve, we're going to be in a better place, I believe. I believe that sometimes the butterfly effect is a real thing. If you ever go look at it, and just to show you how, if you off just a few points, how it can change everything in the system. And what we're trying to realize now is that this ecosystem is complex. any kind of environment where we're trying to do some things traditionally that we've not done before required that. And so I'm gonna end it by saying this, and I hope everybody leaves away with this. The hope and the goal of everything that we're all doing collectively is to put us in a place of shared consciousness, and that we all can get to the place where we think and act as a single organism. This is why I'm a big fan of some of the things that you guys have already talked about, the transparency, the things that Mr. Phillips is talking about. We call in the military that lateral connectivity, that everybody knows someone from the team, and that cross team has a personal relationship that fosters trust and understanding and a willingness to collaborate. And so, and then that'll get us to that place of an empowered execution. And so I thank you all for this opportunity. I would hope that today would just be the fire in your belly to continue to do the work that you've been doing already, and that we continue to understand that this work is by far nowhere done, and we won't get it done if we don't do it together.
Yes. Oh my God. Thank you, my panelists.
Can I say one more thing before we leave?
One more thing. One quick.
I want to say one more thing too.
Right after Captain Phillips.
Go ahead.
He was already ready to start. He might as well. Oh, okay. Well, I will just say thank you, thank you, Dr. Seabrook, and thank you for inviting me, Evangela, and Captain Lilly. I'm a Navy vet too, but I've never heard that term before. And thank you for everything that you had to share, Mr. Carter. So I just appreciate the opportunity to share with you all.
Yes, yes.
Thank
And
you.
Mr. Carter.
All right, so thank you. I want to touch back on the butterfly effect for real, like how the smallest things, they make a big impact. So that's why I really think what life is really about for real. Because like it's even down to going back to my statement about what can we do to strengthen the Black community. It's even as deep as like fix our streets and like put more time into getting those streets fixed efficiently in a time matter basis. Because speaking from my experiences, you cannot think clearly all day, which, listen, let me show you how it's a trickle down effect. So if you wake up in the morning, you're having a good day and you got dodge potholes all day, and you see that the city is putting money into putting sticks and lines on the street, but they're not fixing the potholes, it really make you angry. So you worrying about dodging potholes, and then you ride in the county and the streets is smooth, where you can literally think calm, like you on your way home, you don't got to worry about nothing but listening to music and driving calm. But no, it's like we're constantly at a obstacle course. We go through a mental and physical obstacle course. Like growing up in Baltimore, I feel like it only makes us stronger anyway, but enough is enough. So I feel like that they need to put money into where things matter. Like I feel like they doing with the money that they put in the budget, they just putting it in the trash basically, because it don't have a, like, it's no meaning behind it. So I would say fix the streets, because like, and why do China take like 2 weeks to make a whole building, but we take 2 years to fix Greenmount? I ride up and down Greenmount every day, and when I tell you from what I see, it's never no construction out there. And when it is construction, it's construction going on in the whole city. I feel like they work on one street at the same, they work on every street at the same time. I can tell from my observation that there's no organization. And there's no, like, nobody in behind the scenes that's telling these people this. They're not paying them right or something. But the change, like I said, is with each entity. They need to work on their self. Everybody.
Yes. Thank you. Oh my God, panelists, thank you so much. Now listen, we do not have time for Q&A. Oh, but please send your questions to Evangela Brown, and she will make sure that those specific questions get to the panelists so your questions can be answered. I enjoyed myself. Thank you, panelists. And now I'm going to shift it to Miss Evangela Brown.
Thank you, Dr. Renita Seabrook. I don't even know what to say. This was absolutely wonderful. For our last day that the Office of Equity and Civil Rights is celebrating National Crime Victims Week. Thank you. Once again, thank the VOCA, the Office of Crime Victims from the Department of Justice. This was just absolutely wonderful, starting off with Investigator Jones from the introduction, Dr. Seabrook as the moderator, Mr. Carter, you were absolutely wonderful, Captain Lilly, Mr. Phillips. You know, this was just a great and timely panel. And I hope everyone, you know, learned a lot. These are hard conversations to have. However, they are necessary. And Mr. Phillips, thank you so much for showing us that there is a program out there that we can possibly, you know, use. And once again, Mr. Carter, thank you for the youth perspective, right? Because we don't get that all the time. And I would like to also say that, you know, every Wednesday night for the last maybe month and a half, 2 months, I've had the opportunity to listen to Captain Lilly along with one of my former professors, Pete France, at New Somnus and Candid Community Conversations. And it's been wonderful hearing, you know, some things that I know, but some things that I don't. And from the perspective of African American law enforcement and just different community members. So I'm going to put a plug in that. You know, if anyone has the time every Wednesday at 6 p.m., it's a candid, like it says, Candid Community Conversations. Let me know if you're interested. It would be a great opportunity. So it's 5:31. I'm not going to, someone said, where's Captain Lilly from? The Baltimore County Police Department. And that's, if you mean his work, where, if that's what you mean, in green, they asked that. So in any case, I'm going to thank you all once again. Today is our final day, like I said, but we are going to end with a bang. At 6 p.m., we are going to be having our virtual paint party. Those who signed up have collected their canvases and their paint supplies, and it will be hosted by Painting with a Twist. So we're just going to take a few moments to gather ourselves, and we are going to move on to the last and final event. So thank you all for joining us. It was a great conversation. To everyone that has contributed, thank you so much to the CRB staff, Deputy Director McCray, our new director, Dana Moore. I appreciate everyone and all the hard work that everyone did. Dr. Seabrook, I can't thank you enough, and everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Talk to you all later. Bye-bye.